This is the story of a child who transformed a family that transformed a generation, and how fame transformed Michael Jackson. This is the Thriller Effect. Thriller was released in 1982. 40 years later, kids who were not even born are creating viral content on the basis of Thriller's iconography. He was a child phenom whose professionalism was apparent in the very beginning. The 18 months that fell between 1957 and 1959 were busy. The pop world shifted on its axis. Alan Freed's Big Beat Show resulted in a riot, Freed's arrest,
I'm under subpoena here,
and anti-rock music legislation passing in New Jersey, California, and several other states. Elvis enlisted. Jerry Lee Lewis married his cousin. Chuck Berry was arrested, and Little Richard found Jesus, thus removing 4 threats to society. For the next few years, pop music lost its edge. Fabian, Ricky Nelson, Pat Boone, and Johnny Mathis emerged. Rebels were contained. But the Beatles were taking the stage for the first time at the Cavern Club in Liverpool, and a 15-year-old Jimi Hendrix bought his first electric guitar. In the summer of '58, in the American Midwest, 3 future icons were born. Prince Rogers Nelson in June, Madonna Louise Ciccone in August, and later that August, in Gary, Indiana, Michael Joseph Jackson.
Had we known at the price that we would have to pay, we would have stayed in Gary, Indiana in that 2-bedroom house.
It was 5 of us, and our last name was Jackson, so.
So we were playing a retirement home.
We did a wedding, the Jackson brothers.
In Gary, Indiana.
A little old white lady came up to us. She said, "What's your name?" I said, "Well, we really don't have a name. Well, our last name is Jackson."
We're going by Jackson Brothers because we're brothers.
She said, "You don't have a name." "Well, it's 5 of you, so why don't you just call yourself the Jackson?"
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Music have always been in our home. It's always been there. When Joe and I married, we used to sing together all the time.
Yeah, well, I guess Jackie and my oldest sister, they were born.
Tito, Jermaine, Latoya, Marlon.
So after then, another kid was born.
I used to dance to the rhythm of the washing machine.
Michael was about 12 months old. We had a rickety washing machine. It would make noises. And he was in the kitchen when I'm washing, dancing to the rhythm of the washing machine.
I remember those stories. Every sound around me seemed to start making rhythms and dancing, and I seemed to record in my head.
I knew then he had a lot of rhythm.
Imagine 9 kids living in a 2-bedroom house.
Our house was the size of a 2-car garage. Tito and I slept at the top, Michael and Marlon slept in the middle, and Jackie was at the bottom.
We lived on a street called Jackson Street.
Growing up in Gary, Indiana, that was home. And my father was always honest.
My father always prepared for the family, and as well as my mother. We weren't wealthy, but we weren't poor.
My mother worked at Sears. My father worked in the steel mill.
Modern steel mills are large places. They employ men and women of all races. Shipping convenience and the need for lots of water are 2 reasons why so many steel mills are located on the shores of the Great Lakes.
Man, I went to the steel mill, saw where my father worked. Man, they lit up that steel door and all that heat and fire came out. And I said, oh my God, how does he work in a place like this all the time?
A long time ago, he had a group called Falcons, and they traveled around Chicago and Missouri, small places, but they never made a record or anything like that.
Joe Jackson's dream was to play guitar in a band. The Falcons ended when vocalist Thornton Pookie Watson joined the doo-wop group, The Spaniels. The Spaniels signed to VJ Records, a Gary, Indiana record label. Ironically, the president of VJ Records, Ewart Abner, would sign the Jackson 5 to Motown 20 years later.
Raising kids instead of writing songs, you know. Still thinking about having them involved in show business.
First we started in Gary, Indiana, so we just started listening to the radio.
I used to watch James Brown on television. Whenever he would really start to dance, they would be on a close-up, and I couldn't see his feet, so I could watch and learn.
But one day our television broke down.
And the guy was late fixing it.
We didn't have anything really to do, like in the morning times.
My mom was a great singer, and we used to hear her sing around the house.
She'd be washing the dishes, and we'll be drying them, and she would sing this song, and we would start making harmony.
So we started singing country western around the house with our mom. Yeah, you sing these country western songs, and we would join her.
We started making harmony.
those country western songs. Cotton Fields Back Home.
Sing it, Jermaine. When I was a little bitty baby, my mama used to rock me in the cradle. In the fall, cotton fields back home.
The boys were singing. Michael was way over in the corner. He just joined in perfect harmony. Joseph and his brother.
Every day they would come over playing great music.
They played guitars and they sang. There was always a guitar lying around.
Joseph had warned him, don't play my guitar now.
Don't you touch my guitar when I'm at work.
He didn't want nobody to touch his beautiful guitar. I mean, it was something that he cherished and he laid around as a memory piece.
Tito got Joe's guitar out of the closet and played it.
Tito would play, and eventually we would start singing to the playing. We would sing old folk songs like Cotton Fields Back Home and Ray Charles stuff and James Brown.
I was playing this guitar for months and
the string broke. There was no way of hiding that he had his guitar.
I didn't know how to change the string.
We asked Mom to work my string. And she says, well, before you get upset at Tito, you should hear him play.
He got so mad. When he found out Tito was playing it, he whipped him.
He took care of my ass and said, show me what you know.
And he meant it.
So I'm playing and crying.
Tito started really playing.
Yeah, he's better than you.
That's what she told him.
My father was shocked.
He looked at me and said, dang, you playing just as good as me.
Joseph said nothing else to him. You can play it.
So he gave it to me. Jackie and Jermaine in there, we were harmonizing. The group started with myself, Jackie and Jermaine. Michael and Marlon, they used to beg to be in the group. We used to tell them, this is big boy stuff.
We hadn't done anything out in the public.
Raynard Jones actually put the Jackson Five together. Raynard Jones went to school with the oldest Jackson boy, Jackie Jackson, at Roosevelt High School. Before even their father.
I put Michael Jackson on stage for the first time in his life.
Not really. He's not my age. He hung out with my brothers.
And I had a drum, and Tito had a guitar, and Ray and I had a guitar, and we just kind of just come over in the basement from time to time and just, make music.
At the time, we just making the kids, we kind of playing piano and drums when we first started the group. Raynard Jones, Council 23rd Monroe. It was like a mainly instrumental group, and then we went into making it into a singing group.
Joe Jackson did not even know it.
When they were coming up as kids, there was a lot of bad things happening in the area.
Jackson spent a lot of time inside. Well, those were Joseph's roots.
But they had to know what was going on, keep them out of trouble.
We weren't allowed to go visit or stay all night with other kids.
If I thought that it was time to practice, I could whistle and would come to the window and then walk over to my house.
If you wanted Michael to do something, say stand at a certain part of the stage or sing a certain song and he didn't feel comfortable with it, he wouldn't do it. But once we made Michael comfortable, then he displayed all of his talents.
Michael was only playing the bongos. Jermaine was the lead singer.
He was playing bongos, beating the bongos while we were singing.
And Michael came in playing the Quaker oatmeal boxes. He called himself playing the bongos.
He and his brothers won a talent show at Roosevelt High School right behind their house.
After Raynard put the group together and Joe found out that the group was performing, that's when Joe Jackson took over.
I decided to deal with the boys as much as I possibly can as far as rehearsing them.
He saw some talent there, and he got a plan to make a group.
If we want to have all these kids, they got to be able to do something in life.
He said, I want you to learn every song on the radio. So that's what I started doing.
I gave Jermaine bass guitar lessons when my father bought his second guitar. He started playing the guitar that I was sneaking from my father. So he was playing bass on the guitar.
I was 5 years old and started singing around the house.
Michael was unique. His pitch and his tone of his voice.
My father got a new car, and you know how you open the car door and the buzzer sounds? Mike actually got harmony with the buzzer. How in the world could he do that?
At that time, Jermaine was singing a lot of lead.
I was the lead singer first, and then Michael came in.
I mentioned to Joseph, Michael, he has a pretty nice voice for lead. He just said, oh no, let Jermaine sing him. I don't think he can do it. The school had a program. Michael was singing solo, Climb Every Mountain. Joe's father wanted to hear him, and Michael started singing.
He tore it up, man. We couldn't believe our mouths flew open.
I looked around. Joe's father was crying.
We rushed him home, told him he's in the group. Mom said, me too.
Michael, you used to couldn't keep him still at all. He was always dancing or moving,
Michael started coming out doing this James Brown sort of thing, And so wait a minute.
James Brown and spinning and
maybe
dancing.
Maybe he should be
all
up
this
front.
stuff.
I like Sammy Davis Jr. and James Brown. I just watch him on television. I do most of his dancing on stage, and I just like the way Sammy sings.
He was fast, he could move real fast on stage, and When Michael came into the picture, the whole thing started changing.
He had that energy, he had the wits about him. Even though Michael was the youngest, he stood out.
My mother said, you know, he should be leading.
And after they were going out singing, people started responding to Michael.
Then we started doing all these talent shows. And we would win these talent shows.
We would do talent shows. We would win every talent show. Our house was loaded with trophies.
My father started rehearsals every day after school. Other kids would be outside playing.
There was a big baseball park behind our house. We would hear the ring of the crowd and the kids eating candy and popcorn. We would be inside rehearsing.
People would look in from the window and watch.
Neighbors be telling us to be quiet, making all that noise over there. You ain't going nowhere.
And they would tease us, oh, you're doing this, you're not going to get nowhere. But we just rehearsed every day.
And we say, just wait and see, you'll see.
We kept rehearsing and sweating and rehearsing.
Catherine would work with him when I'm at work, you know, still operating the crane. When I got off from work, I would rehearse them, sometimes 2 hours.
Father, it was really, really tough.
I remember my mother allowing my brothers and sisters to play outside, and then they'd see my father's car coming down the street and run into the house. Joseph's coming, Joseph's coming. They pick up the instruments and start playing like they were rehearsing all along.
Like in that area, everybody, they tried to make a group, but a couple of weeks later, they would break up. We the main one that stayed together.
We couldn't understand why somebody could be so mean and so strict. It was crazy.
If she hit me, I would hit her back, which was terrible. I would run around the house and hide, but I would really get it more than anybody.
Michael never got spanked. They could never catch it, brother. He was quick.
He was this little kid seeing us getting spanked, and he was saying, am I next? It would frighten him because he's the youngest. We didn't understand his vision to keep us out of trouble and to get us out of here.
It's always going to be rough when there's only one working, and we sacrificed a lot.
He spent all the money on instruments for the boys.
There was a lot of instruments to buy, and they cost a lot of money. Drums, guitars, amplifiers, and I had all this stuff piled up on top of the Volkswagen microbus.
My mother, she always made all of our clothes. Mother would sew and stitch everything. Everything we wore before really making it at Motown.
Our main music that we based around was Motown. We used to do all the Temptation records and the Supremes and some James Brown records, and I would, do the lead.
One of the songs Michael used to sing was called Skinny Legs and All. And Who Want the Woman with the Skinny Legs? And he would go out in the audience and he'd go grab a lady out. Who want the woman with the skinny legs? And don't you worry about a doggone thing at all. He was just a little kid. People thought it was so cute how he would do it.
We would come on amateur hour. These people had like a local record going. We would win the trophy every time.
I do a lot of shows around Chicago, nightclubs, the Riga Theater.
We would gig on the weekdays after school. Most of the time we had rehearsals prior to doing the gig.
We would come home from school and hit to the instruments.
We rehearsed and go to that gig about 7 o'clock in the evening in Chicago.
When we played shows in Chicago, people would throw money on stage.
We would only make like $15 a night doing the show. Most of our money was made people throwing money on the floor. You'd be up there dancing, all these quarters and dollars would be thrown at you, and you're doing splits and picking up money and putting it in your pocket.
We're doing splits left and right. We get to keep the money.
Our pockets were so loaded with money that we couldn't keep them up. We'd be loaded with money.
Get back home somewhere around 1 or 2 in the morning, get up and go to school. We were going to Wisconsin and New York trying to make a name for ourselves. It wasn't just an overnight stay. It took a long time. 5-6 years before the Motown days. We did what they call the chillin' circuit.
We used to travel from Gary to Chicago, and then from there to Apollo.
You would do a show that would be 20 to 30 acts. It was very much like vaudeville. You would do just a certain amount of songs.
And when we did the Apollo, we had a rivalry between us and the 5 stair steps.
We would come on amateur hour, like at the Apollo. James Brown sitting on the wings and learning. We used to have to go on stage after him because he would come on and see nothing like that kind of emotion, feeling. They were like in a trance, and they had the audience in the palm of their hand. Jackie Wilson and all those different great entertainers. We played the theater for so long. Best experience in the world.
Not only them, the OJs, Shylights.
There was Denise Williams, Earth, Wind & Fire was on some of these shows. It was Gladys who discovered us first.
By 1968, the Jackson 5 were still attempting to navigate the pop music bubble from way outside. It was an insane decade. If you listen to people who experienced the 60s, they'll tell you, for better or worse, everything changed. Every documentary, every film, every TV show based on this era stresses that the 60s began with the optimism of a daydream. They called JFK's White House Camelot, but the 60s don't look like a daydream, not from the outside looking in. If there ever was an age of innocence in America, it ended the day John F. Kennedy was assassinated. On the music side, the 60s ushered in an edgier blend of music. The crooners of the late 50s found fewer outlets for simple songs about teenage romance. Music had evolved. The icons driving this new aesthetic were the Beatles and Motown records. Two camps captured the attention of the world simultaneously, both creating key anthems at a critical moment. The Beatles fused pop music with elements of ska, folk, Indian, psychedelia, classical, and pioneers Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Buddy Holly, and Elvis Presley. Brian Epstein presented these four boys from Liverpool as English mods, and the crowds loved it. Berry Gordy, founder of Motown Records, emerged with an inconceivable army of talent, and they all grew up within blocks of each other. Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, the Supremes, Martha Reeves and the Vandellas, the Temptations, both of these camps would define a generation. Motown and the Beatles typified the ethos of this ascendant culture. Master songwriting, major hit records. The ensuing financial windfall blew the music industry wide open. As youth culture became counterculture, business interests built a lucrative infrastructure around idealism.
And it was at this point that Lou Adler asked me to go to the Monterey Pop Festival.
The 1967 Monterey Pop Festival was a revelation for CBS record executive Clive Davis.
Dazzled by what I had seen at Monterey, and my life would be changed forever.
He saw a massive audience, standing room only. The potential for growth was limitless.
And when I started singing, I didn't think it was a big business.
I feel grown up for all my life. I've been around grown people, since I was 5. I mean, on tour, backstage, with all the musicians and the singers.
The Chitlin Circuit was a network of theaters where black artists performed for black audiences. A main feature of the circuit shows amateur nights. The GOATs of the 70s came out of these 60s contests. The competition was legendary.
We were like traveling in this van.
4 shows a night.
Nightclubs too.
My father was controlling all the activities of his little boys at that time.
Sometimes we'll do talent shows at schools.
We were winning all of the talent shows.
That was a big thing in Chicago. We sang in Chicago before we had a record deal. People knew of the Hutchinson Sunbeams.
We all came up young teenagers, not in control of what we were doing. The stair-steps also lead the way for every family group that came after us, including my brothers, the Jackson.
I mean, they were ready to ask and ready to learn.
They were friends of mine, all these great artists, because I was just a little kid looking up to these people.
The J5s, they looked up to us. They loved and respected us.
Oh yeah, that was that rival. Five Stair Steps was one of those groups that we used to look at and say, that's what we have to be like. We loved the way they dressed.
During the time, we wanted to sort of be like these people.
We were trying to get to that stage, and they had it already. And they were professionals. They had a song out by the name of Ooh Child. Made a lot of noise.
We were known for our choreography. Boy, oh boy, did we burn up some stages. But trust and believe this, those brothers know. They know.
Five Stair Steps, they would come over to the Apollo Theater and just tear it up. The young ladies would scream and chase them off stage, and that's what we want.
Yeah, with dancing, it's always been a special part of us because we admire the groups that were doing choreography when we were coming up.
Father and their father, Joe Jackson, were friends. We were always like this, man.
We used to run into emotions. They used to travel. We would travel right behind them.
When you would rehearse, they would say, oh, these the Hutchinson Sunbeams. Oh, can they show us something? And you would do that. And they'd come up and you would actually help them.
Well, I wondered myself how Michael sang those songs with so much feeling, as if he had lived the part.
The Jackson 5 were competitive. Joe Jackson made sure of that. But before the Jackson 5 got to Motown, they had to learn how to win.
Now, I'll give you an example. And everybody claimed everybody loved Michael Jackson. They lied.
If they loved him, so how come it took him so long to make it? They did not love Michael Jackson then.
And we used to do the Regal Theater in Chicago, Chicago's version of the Apollo.
Purvis Spann, who was one of the biggest disc jockeys in the city, used to have a talent show at the Regal Theater.
I started the Jackson 5. A guy by the name of Leo Blackburn brought him to the nightclub, on a nightclub called the Burning Spear. Michael and company, I listened to them and put them on the talent shows at the old Regal Theater.
There was in Chicago a Regal Theater. It was on 47th Street.
They were performing on the talent show that Wednesday night.
The talent on that Wednesday night was us,
the Hutchinson Sunbeams,
the Five Stair Steps, and our guys from Gary. They would come there for the talent shows because there were no talent shows in Gary, Indiana.
And we have to play the same show.
Gladys Knight, they were on the bill.
I got a chance to meet the Jacksons at the Regal Theater in Chicago, and I heard them before I saw them, and I jumped up and I said, "Who is that?"
And they were so impressed with what we were doing.
I ran to the banister to try to see who it was.
He was magnificent.
And we won that night. The prize that night was a contract with Stax.
In Chicago at the Regal Theater, we won the show and we beat the Jackson 5, who was on the show also. Oh, it wasn't even close.
Father kept us rehearsing because we worked very hard. We practiced 5 hours a day.
We were being forced to spend our weekends in Chicago and other places trying to win amateur shows.
Rehearsals, it's because we want to be the best at what we do. And so put a lot of hard work into it.
Jermaine, Tito, and the rest of us were under tremendous pressure. I knew all the things my brothers and I had to do so well that I could have performed the routines in my sleep.
We were doing a show at the Regal Theater in Chicago.
It got to a point where every week at the Regal Theater, the Jackson 5 would win this contest.
We won that show at the Regal Theater for 3 straight weeks.
So no one else wanted to appear on the show because they figured, why appear? We're not going to win anyway.
We kept the Jackson 5 around Chicago a long time.
We were basically a local band that the pros used to come through Chicago, and we were the opening act.
Well, I had to buy them food every day to get to shows at the Regal Theater.
If you won 3 straight amateur nights, you were invited to do a paid show. The show we did was headlined by Gladys Knight and the Pips, who were breaking in. I heard it through the grapevine.
We played a concert in Gary, Indiana for our mayor, Richard Gordon Hatcher. He was campaigning at the time, so Gladys Knight was his guest there.
Joe Jackson and Catherine were struggling trying to get into the entertainment world.
Their father brought them up after their rehearsal.
I said, let me see what I can do. I called the company and I asked them if they could send a representative.
It was Gladys who discovered us first.
Gladys Knight, she was there with us from day one. We did a show in Chicago, and she liked us. She wanted Berry Gordy to see us.
Berry Gordy wasn't interested at first.
I did not want a kids group because I had Stevie Wonder and Chaperone teachers. I did not want a kids group at all.
I was the manager in conjunction with the daddy, Joe Jackson. I took them to RCA Victor, a record company, and they turned them down because their voices were too soft.
They had shot their music most of the majors of that day.
One day, not long after we'd been successful in the Chicago clubs, Dad brought home a tape of some songs. It was just one guy singing badly with some guitar chords. Dad told us that the man on the tape was a songwriter who owned a recording studio in Gary. His name was Mr. Keith.
Well, I was first seeing them on a billboard, so I was looking for a talented group that also had discipline. They performed for me, but I gave them an audition in their home. He had great voice control. He really sang like he was a full-grown man. And when he danced, I didn't think anybody could beat him.
Really, it was a little shocking to find a talented group that was disciplined, that had 3 who could sing well. Jackie, Jermaine, and the very dynamic Michael. We formed Steeltown Records with 4 other guys. I have the very first contract that they signed.
I signed a 6-month contract with Steeltown.
Well, Steeltown was just a local record company in Gary.
Gordon Keith produced the Jacksons' very first recordings before they double-crossed me and went to Motown.
We'd go to the Uptown in Philly and the Apollo Theater here in New York.
There's the Regal, the Uptown, the Apollo. The talent that came out of those places is of mythical proportion.
The big dates for us opened up for Jackie Wilson.
I got to know these great artists. These were the best entertainers in the world. They were showstoppers, and I would have to go on stage sometime after them.
He was very good dancing and spinning and doing a split. And he must have been rehearsing a little bit off to the side when no one was looking.
James has known Michael since he's 5 years old. Michael used to come to his shows and sit in the wings and study him. He's like a stepson, like a godson.
After Chicago was the Apollo Theater, Dad knew there were more record people in New York. That's what a win at the Apollo meant to us.
At the Apollo Theater in New York.
You were there before you were brought? How did you get there?
Well, they heard that we were doing tours, the booking agency. Father got in the booking agency and they called us.
Chicago had sent a scouting report to booking agencies in New York. The Apollo entered us in the Superdog finals, even though we hadn't won the preliminary competitions.
My agent at that time was Universal Section. Dolores and Larry Miles called me and said, Joe, we got some boys. We want to put them on your show. And they said, Joe, you can manage them and you can put them on your record label. I said, I don't have time for kids, man, because I was trying to get my own career together.
Yeah, New York City, yes. I managed the Jackson 5. I was their attorney from about 67 to 70. I was working for the Musicians Union. I was a new lawyer. A gentleman, his name was Baby James, came into the union, knocked on my door. He said he had a group coming in. He wanted to be the manager of the Jackson 5. He wanted me to make sure that he had the papers ready the next day.
My father was a managerial genius, and my brothers and I owe our success to the forceful way that he pushed us. I couldn't miss a step.
Michael was a boy with the old man's soul. My father did a brilliant job. He had a dream, he had direction, and he knew how to get there. My father prepared his sons. We were men at a very young age.
Practice. I practiced a lot. Not only were we practicing, we were nervous rehearsing because he sat in the chair and he had this bell in his hand. And if you missed a step, he would tear you up.
I remember the band recording the song I'm a Big Boy Now.
Gordon Keith. Right.
Mr. Keith had given us a week to practice his songs to see if we could make a record out of them. Naturally, we were excited. We wanted to make a record. And in those days, having a record with your group's name on it was quite something. We felt very fortunate.
My name is Leroy Phillips. I was a record promoter for Wonderful Records. That is where I first met Mr. Gordon Keith.
Gordon Keith produced the Jackson's very first recordings before they double-crossed me and went to Motown.
Gordon Keith brought Michael Jackson and the Jackson 5 down to Wonderful Records to record them.
Wonderful recording company which was owned by Ernie Lehner.
Ernie Lehner of Lehner Brothers were early adapters in the Chicago area. They owned radio stations, music halls, recording studios. One of those studios and record labels was Wonderful Records.
He kept them down there trying to record them.
When we get out of school, we always meet up at Wonderful Studio. So happened Eddie Silver had the Jackson 5, Jackie, Michael, Tito, and Jermaine, and their cousin, I forget his name, he played the drum. They were recording I'm a Big Boy Now.
Mr. Keith met us at the door and opened the studio. I put on some big metal headphones.
The budget wasn't big, it was nothing. We could have recorded this song in our living room.
We were told to listen to Mr. Keith. The record would take care of itself.
They were already playing the song when I came into the studio practicing, but they couldn't get the sound together. I walked in the studio, and Eddie Silvers asked me, did I have my guitar? And he said, grab your guitar, I want you to play this other part with them. But there's both of us playing. We had to split that up. It's the Jackson 5 playing. Tito is playing. Their cousin's playing the drums. Otis Hayes, he was the engineer. By me being on the staff there, I was asked to show Jermaine how to keep his bass from booming, and that's where I came in to help them get the sound together.
You have to imagine a skinny 9-year-old singing this song. I was far too young to grasp the real meanings of most of the words. I just sang what they gave me. It was a nice song about a kid who wanted to fall in love with some girl. After the records were pressed, Mr. Keith gave us some copies so that we could sell them after shows.
I have the original demos before we even recorded them ourselves.
Bud Presner walked into the studio and said, Ben, I need to talk to you in the control room. And my friend was there with a demo tape. When I heard Michael's voice.
Ben Brown was the first person to really take a chance on the Jacksons. The Jackson 5 recorded their first single, called Big Boy, and it was a minor hit in 5 states.
I have a hit. They had a #1 record with Still Down.
It might have not been as big as the Motown, but that was their first record.
I had a contract with Atlantic Records in reference to the Jacksons' very first record, Big Boy.
The partnership set up at Steeltown included Ben Brown, Bud Presner, Gordon Keith, etc. The distribution agreement with Atco, Atlantic Records, was constructed by VP Henry Allen. Like we said in episode 2, new record labels were popping up all the time. Everyone was looking for the next big thing. Not even the Jacksons knew that they were it.
And Gary, that record began to get radio play.
When I first heard myself on the radio, the song sounded so much better than they did in the recording studios. I cranked it all the way up.
We became a big deal in Out Neighborhood.
Big Boy was a hit record in several regions.
After that, we began to aim for all the big talent shows.
So this record brought them to the Apollo Theater in 1968.
A gentleman, his name was Baby James, came into the union, knocked on my door.
Baby James was part of James Brown's New York operation. And who was James Brown? Well, James Brown, we all know. Godfather of soul, Mr. Excitement. And by 1968, the Mafia was a dominant player. The Mafia influenced radio, performances, sometimes they even owned the venue. Without going into a whole history, New York was a Mafia stronghold. Alan Leeds, longtime tour manager for James Brown, describes a pretty dangerous environment for entertainers.
Mr. Brown was a razor-sharp businessman. He knew his way around. He owned his own little Learjet. You had to be able to think on your feet and deal with all kinds of people, some of whom you wouldn't want in your house. With a lot of hustlers and a lot of people with ulterior motives who meant you no good, both financially and even sometimes physically.
James Brown had his fingerprints all over the entertainment business. Brown realized early on that he had to be more than just an entertainer. James would have to institute some fail-safes. One example of a James Brown fail-safe was the security team he called his hit squad. Baby James was one of James Brown's trusted sidemen. In the James Brown biography, Kill 'Em and Leave, James McBride describes the job James required a sideman to do. James McBride writes, James felt cornered in the North. The mob had a strong hand in the music business. And when James Brown came to New York to play the Apollo, mobsters would make offers. James always refused. Then the threats would come. They'd threaten to beat me down or release rats into the theater. I'd say, let them come. Brown's New York team consisted of Henry Stallings, John Terry, Willie Glenn, and Baby James Pearson. This was James Brown's hit squad. James boasted that his hit squad would, quote, kill a man for $1,000. They all carried 38 caliber pistols in their breeches and were not afraid to shoot, unquote. In R.J. Smith's The One, The Life and Times of James Brown, Baby James Pearson is described, quote, he was a different kind of person, extraordinarily rough. We had to keep him straight. Henry Stallings continued, see, you gotta give a little, you gotta take a little. Baby was the type to take it all. When Mr. Brown asked him to do stuff, Baby would be doing it to death.
First they said, how'd you get up here through the union? He said, well, I just walked up. He said he had a group coming in. He wanted me to make sure that he be the manager of the Jackson 5. He wanted me to have these papers ready the next day.
And they were still little amateurs. They went on to St. Louis and Philadelphia.
Joseph was talking to many people.
Attorney Richard Aarons, one of the very people that helped the Jacksons double-cross me.
I have to go to 52nd Street to the booking agency that got him into the Apollo. They started peeling $100 bills off.
James, this is Ben Bart.
Ben Bart founded Universal Attractions, and James was one of its most promoted artists. As a matter of fact, he was also his manager. Ben Bart and James Brown had a very close business and personal relationship. Universal Attractions was and remains the biggest booking agency in the entertainment industry, or at least one of them. The Jackson 5 were about 1 year away from becoming one of the biggest live acts in the country. There were a lot of people looking to get a piece.
I didn't know that much about booking. They said, baby, you go back to Gary and get them to the Apollo. After I saw that these professional guys giving him hundreds to go, I said, get them to sign it. You're the manager. They come into New York.
We got to the Apollo at 125th Street.
At the Apollo Theater, it was a place where talent would go and try to win.
The great entertainers, the great performers, the great showmen at the Apollo.
The real entertainers, man, the real make you get goosebumps.
My father used to always say, don't mess up. I felt I knew every part. If something went wrong, I felt I could cover it.
We walked through the theater staring at all of the pictures of the stars. They were my teachers.
You had Moms Mabley or Etta James were the acts that came in, or Sam and Dave.
Etta James was the headliner, and the Jacksons were third.
At the Apollo Theater, if you win that, you could perform any place in the world. But if you didn't win...
If they don't like you, they start standing up, get off, and the guy comes on and shoves them off.
Like grabbing a hook and hooking them on stage. That came on before us. The crowd started throwing eggs at him and stuff like that because they were bad. You know, he would cry like a baby. So we would try to comment to Mike, just do your thing. Everything's going to be okay. Because he didn't want them throwing eggs on him. He forget they're going to do the same thing to him.
They appear at the Apollo, and I went and I saw the group.
You have to touch the stump they had on stage.
They come on, and it was amazing. This little kid, the people go nuts. This kid was sensational. They sing like they were meant to be together. And then Michael, he was like 10 years old. I was blown away by their talent.
It just happens when I come on stage and you feel the audience, the forces back and forth. When they get aroused, we get aroused. And it's just a wonderful feeling. I'm really not that outgoing when I'm off stage. When I'm on stage, it's totally different, really.
It's me.
What?
You won, baby. We won.
So most artists get on stage when they get ready to perform. They don't have any magic in what they're doing on stage. Michael had it all, you know.
We came on Amateur Night and did our thing, and people enjoyed us.
We won the Apollo Amateur Night competition. And I felt like going back to those photos on the walls and thanking my teachers.
James Brown's record label, People, was about to come online around 1969. Here's Frankie Crocker and James Brown discussing their Michael Jackson post-Apollo reaction.
Well, we know we had him at the Apollo Theater. He did a James Brown imitation, and Michael Jackson is doing James Brown, the dance, everything. And that's one of the reasons he caught our eye at the Apollo Theater, because there's this young kid who really could do James Brown.
Well, you know that.
James Brown had his own airplane, his own recording station, his own fast food restaurant. If he was going to launch People Records, you have to believe that he was aware of the 9-year-old in the Midwest doing a dead-on James Brown stage show. So was Baby James trying to strong-arm Joseph Jackson, or was he acting on behalf of Mr. Brown? The timing and certain claims Mr. Brown would make later on suggest that Baby James was doing James Brown business.
They had to do 5 times a day at the Apollo.
Having just won the amateur night competition, the Jackson 5 were now set up for weeks of shows at the Apollo Theater during that year.
See, the Apollo Theater was a place that Michael Jackson and his brothers went through me on my show.
Okay, the Jackson 5, Emotions, and Five Stair Steps, and Ronnie Millsap. We all did the Apollo together the very first time we did it.
How many shows we used to do, Marlon, at the Apollo? 7 shows a night or something like that? 6 or 7 shows a day.
We played the Apollo Theater. They stole the show from everybody.
If I did a great show, he would tell me it was a good show. If I did an okay show, he would say nothing. He seemed intent, above all else, on tissue, I'm sorry, on making us a commercial success.
I told the manager of the hotel, I'll pay for everything. I'll pay for the room.
Most of the artists staying for return engagements at the Apollo would stay at the Teresa Hotel, about a block away.
Within that week, Joe says to me, you're a lawyer, I like you. I don't want Baby James to manage them. He owes me money, didn't pay me back, so get the contracts back.
Here we are at the Apollo Theater. These guys are talking in a room, and I'm in another room resting. I overhear them talking about doing production and management and so forth, but they were not including me in the conversation.
Joe told me that he wanted me to work with him. Joe asked me to help him manage the Jackson 5. He signed a piece of paper with me.
I went to Atlantic Records to get an advance on money. They gave me $500. I was talking to Henry Allen, vice president for Atlantic Records. He said, well, Gordon, Joseph Jackson and the Jacksons have been here with their own attorney. They say that you don't represent them anymore. I catch up with Joseph Jackson at the Apollo Theater, and I asked him to go out to the back. with me. So we went out back. I told Joseph what Henry Allen had told me. So I said, what is going on? And he told me, he said, Gordon, man, I'm just trying to make it.
After the Apollo, we kept an eye on the phone. We had to keep the lines clear in case anyone from a record company wanted to get in touch with us.
We got a call from David Frost Show.
Someone who had seen us at the Apollo recommended us to the David Frost Show in New York City.
At the beginning of the episode, Michael said that his father was a managerial genius, and there's more than enough evidence of his skill. Joe Jackson understood that although James Brown was a force in music, Universal Attraction was really the man behind the curtain. Because of this dynamic and the degrees of separation that would inevitably keep Joseph from making career decisions for the Jackson 5, Joseph aligned himself with Richard Aarons. It's really clear powerful entities were attempting to get control even in the earliest stages of the Jackson 5's career.
Berry Gordy was the main force behind the Jackson 5.
I wanted to make a whole plan for this group.
You were really discovered by Mayor Richard Hatcher. Tell that story.
Mayor Richard Hatcher, he gave a benefit show, and Dinah Ross was one of his guests. After the show was over, she came backstage and told us how good we were, and she would like to take us to Motown.
Diana Ross picked up on this. We hear what we are now.
They started that conspiracy to double-cross me right from the beginning.
Everyone who bought the Jackson 5's debut album, Diana Ross Presents, was fed a cover story. It was literally a cover story. The story was on the cover. Quote, honesty has always been a very special word for me. Mayor Gordon Hatcher. He's the one who brought the Jackson 5 to my attention. Signed, Diana Ross. Unquote. The Jackson 5 would be introduced to the world as the proteges of Motown's biggest selling and most glamorous artist. Diana Ross brought the Jackson 5 to Motown.
I like that. But that ain't the truth.
The cover story is Berry Gordy's genius at work. It's a masterpiece of marketing. The story was the key to the Jackson 5's professional rollout, and the plan worked. The Jackson 5's run of hits was uninterrupted for 3 solid years. But the cover story is false. The cover story needs you to accept that a chance meeting was the reason that the Jackson 5 broke big. It wasn't. Diana Ross's name was on the cover, but the story was a lie.
Why don't you tell me what really happened?
First time I saw Michael and the Jacksons singing Smokey Robinson interpretation and that little voice. When I had you, treated you bad. You're going, wow, look at this baby singing this adult song. It was at the Apollo Theater.
After the Apollo, we kept an eye on the phone. We had to keep the lines clear in case anyone from a record company wanted to get in touch with us.
We were introduced to Richard Aarons.
I managed the Jackson 5.
Richard had useful connections. He was the son of the chairman of a musicians union in New York.
I used to wear suits, so I had cards that said Richard Aarons.
And after the Steeltown record, we had done some demos at Mr. Keith's.
Richard put together a professional media package with our Steeltown hit, promotional material, and a letter explaining the Jackson 5.
Because we had sent some tapes to Motown.
Joseph mailed a package to Motown Records in Detroit addressed to Mr. Berry Gordy, hoping to follow up on Gladys Knight's recommendation.
We found out that they didn't get the tapes.
Motown's acts dominated the charts throughout the 60s, and Berry Gordy's publishing company was the most valuable music catalog in the industry. But the future wasn't really secure, even given that, because Eddie Kendricks had quit the Temptations, and Diana Ross was preparing for a solo career, and Holland Dozier Holland, Motown's most successful songwriters, were suing Berry Gordy for unpaid royalties. By the time the Jackson 5 parked their Volkswagen microbus at Hitsville, USA, they had already met at least 10 major acts and had a song that was getting regional airplay.
They started playing the clubs, nightclubs, things of that sort.
Places around had heard about them. They would play at Mr. Lucky's.
Being at Mr. Lucky's meant that for the first time we had a whole show to do. 5 sets a night, 6 nights a week. And if Dad could get us something out of town for the 7th night, he was going to do it.
Joseph booked us anywhere he could find an opening.
Mr. Lucky liked their performances because he had them their luck.
I used to stand in the wings and watch a lady whose name was Mary Rose. I must have been 9 or 10. This girl would take off her clothes and throw them to the audience. The men would pick them up and sniff them and yell. My brothers and I would be watching all this. We
were exposed to a lot.
Sharing a venue with the erotic strippers was like hanging with the devil. Joseph was not detailing our exact itinerary to Mother. One night, a lacy panty found its way into one of our bags. Mother marched out of our bedroom holding a nipple tassel between her fingers. Where did this come from? This is quite the life you are showing them, Joseph.
We got a call from David Frost's show.
David Frost had a TV show.
Someone who had seen us at the Apollo recommended us to the David Frost Show in New York City.
David Frost, he's nationally known. We do his show, everybody's going to see us.
We were going to be on TV. That was the biggest thrill. I remember the days leading up to that trip. We were going to drive out there in a few days. I told everyone at school.
A very happy, a very jaunty, a very cocksure little boy. He considered himself a star at the time.
This was in the 5th grade. He came into Miss Finkerbell's class and he gave Greta and I and Tanya Glenn these little chains. And he brought them to us and told us that he was leaving.
Mom was used to our being away for days.
Joseph was supposed to leave from the Regal Theater in Chicago and go on to New York to David Frost.
I gave a show at the Regal Theater with Smokey Robinson and a few of the other people.
Bobby Taylor and the Vancouvers. We had a hit record. We were on Motown.
Bobby Taylor was playing with them at the Regal Theater.
We met Michael in Chicago at the Regal Theater.
At the Regal in Chicago, we were waiting for Smokey Robinson to head to rehearsal.
When we were doing the shows, and they'd be on the show, man, Michael was a little guy. Michael would change his clothes. He would watch everybody on the show. Everybody.
I just sit there watching them. Every show, it's so terrific.
Stand in the wing and just watch. Michael was a genius.
Michael absorbed every little detail, focusing on Smokey's words or Jackie's feet. The way they talked, how their skin looked.
Man, you can learn so much just watching. It's unbelievable.
We couldn't believe he was actually taking time out for us. He was wearing a black turtleneck. Michael peppered Smokey with questions. When do the songs come to you? Smokey gave us a good 5 minutes.
When I first shook Smokey Robinson's hand, it was like shaking hands with a king. I walked around saying, his hand is so soft.
I said, he ain't done nothing but write songs. No wonder, Michael added, they were softer than Mother's.
The first time I saw Michael, everybody was blown away. It was incredible.
The leader of the Charlites, Marshall Thompson. Marshall asked me to go and look at this kid that was on stage.
I've been running the Jackson 5 all over Chicago playing them clubs. Bobby come out with a smash hit before us, and he was headlining the show at the Regal Theater. So the Charlites was co-starring with Bobby Taylor.
Spinning around like James Brown. I said, dang. I asked him, how'd you like to go to Motown? He said, you don't need it. Gladys Knight said she was going to do that. She did. I said, where did she see you? She said, well, we went on the talent contest.
Him and the Jackson 5 won a contest.
We met Gladys Knight on that show. And she said, you boys are good. I'm going to get you to Motown. He said, we never heard from her again.
Well, let's clear this up. I didn't carry a whole lot of weight at the company. They said, well, we'll do the best we can. If he came, he didn't say anything to me.
The way they left Chicago was they invited him to Motown.
He told the Jackson 5 and Joe.
I said, okay, tell you what, you want to go with Motown? I said, I'll take you there and I'll get you signed.
And you stay at my place, we'll get you into Motown. And come on to Detroit.
And that's how they got to Motown.
And so the next day I was watching TV and watched the David Frost show and they didn't show up. I was scared and I was wondering what happened. I was calling around with different people.
Bobby Taylor said he went back to Barry Gordy.
Bobby Taylor told Motown about us.
Motown gave us a call.
It was national television exposure versus one golden opportunity.
I was for David Frost. They were for Motown because that was our idols. We auditioned for Barry. What if he don't like us?
Joseph chose the audition.
That afternoon, Dad said the trip to New York was canceled. We all stopped in our tracks and just stared at him. We had been about to get our big breaks. What was going on? I canceled it. My father announced.
David Frost wouldn't bring us closer to a record deal, but the audition did.
So we decided to do a little audition.
He didn't even tell me that he was going to Detroit instead of going to David Frost.
Took him, his father, the kids. And a couple of kids you never hear about, Ronnie Ransford and Johnny Jackson. They were the piano player and the drummer. They were a part of that.
Ronnie and Johnny came to back us up.
I called and found out that Joseph went on to Detroit to let him play for Mr. Gordy.
The Jackson 5 audition story, it's a weird one. One story claims that the audition took place in front of Mr. Gordy, and he signed them immediately. Another story claims that Gordy and all the Motown stars were in Detroit watching the audition. Some people say the audition took place in Los Angeles, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah, we're in the business of producing phonograph records in terms of our primary interest. A group gigging locally says, let's go and get on record. They can come break into the music industry.
I was living in an apartment building where Bobby Taylor lived.
When I got to Detroit, I called Berry Gordy up.
He called me, you got to come down here and see something in my apartment. I said, yeah, right, Bobby.
I had them all staying in my one-bedroom apartment.
And I went down and stretched out across the floor were Michael, Joe, and his brothers. Bobby, and he says, okay, boys, get up, let's sing. And they sang a cappella, blew me away. I knew I had seen something great.
Susan in the past, they grabbed me one day. There's a kids group, you got to see them. I said, I've got Stevie Wonder. The last thing I want is a kids group. She said, but you want them. I said, I won't.
There were actually 2 signings of the Jackson 5 to Motown. The first time they were signed, Berry Gordy was in Los Angeles. J.R. Taraborelli's book, Michael Jackson, The Magic and the Madness, recounts Joe Jackson's reaction to being told that Berry Gordy was not at the audition. Ralph Seltzer, Motown's attorney, said, quote, "We've heard a lot about your group. Mr. Gordy couldn't be here." "You mean Mr. Gordy's not here? Then they should reschedule the audition to when he gets back." Ralph Seltzer explained that they intended to film the audition and send it to Mr. Gordy in Los Angeles. Mr. Gordy will render a decision at that time, unquote.
On July 23rd, 1968, we found ourselves performing to a handful of people, including Mr. Gordy.
Susan in the past, she kind of drugged me into the audition room.
We couldn't see because they were gathered on the other side of the glass. We only saw a camera on a tripod.
Here's a kid who was about 7, 8 years old singing a Smokey song. She sung Who's Loving You better than Smokey. This kid, and he was doing a James Brown thing, and he did a twirl and a split. This kid was like this master.
The last song we sang was Who's Loving You. When it ended, no one applauded.
No one said a word.
I couldn't stand not knowing.
Michael yelled, "So how was that?"
Jermaine shushed me.
I said, "Michael!" "Very good," said some voice. That was all we got.
The man who had led us back said, "Thanks for coming up." I was confused. I think my brothers were too. We looked at Dad's face for some indication. He didn't seem pleased or disappointed. It was still daylight out when we left. We took I-94 back to Gary.
During the July 23rd audition, the black and white film was viewed live by Motown staff and the cameraman. Berry Gordy was mailed a copy of the audition tape, and he instructed Suzanne DePass to sign them immediately.
2 days later, we got the call back.
We were jubilant when we learned we had passed the Motown audition.
Motown wanted to sign us.
We had a lot of offers from other companies, but we decided to go to Motown.
Signed, sealed, and delivered.
The contract that the Jacksons signed with Motown was a standard Motown contract, but that's not good news. Jackson 5's deal gave the group 6% of 90% of the wholesale price of each album sold, a standard Motown royalty rate. That sum would be split 5 ways. Each of the Jackson 5 got about 2 cents per record.
But the first time I heard about it was Eddie Holland on WMPP. He said that they had just signed with Motown.
Team 70, in case you just joined us, this is WMPP. Time to molest. I just wanted to let y'all know that Motown has just signed an exciting young group called the Jackson 5. The little fella out front is amazing.
Things start to get complicated. Atco Atlantic Records had a distribution deal through Steeltown. Their co-manager, Richard Aarons, had rights established through the management agreement he signed with Joe Jackson in New York City.
Richard Aarons called me and said, "Gordon, what is this shit I hear about the Jackson 5 signing with Motown?"
Motown called me up.
They had a plan. When we signed with Motown, Barry had a meeting with us, and he told us that we want to get 3 #1 records in a row with you all. Then we're going to do this, I'm going to do that, and we don't want anyone to see you.
We signed with Motown in 1968, over a year before we even got in the studio.
Legal loose ends were still being tied up with Steeltown Records. It was nothing to worry about. Mr. Gordy didn't seem concerned.
But remember, Berry Gordy was a brilliant tactician. At this stage, he had an advantage. He had possession of a talented teen band with a dynamic frontman. And because of the Jackson 5's previous contract, the Motown contract that they signed was probably voidable. If the group didn't live up to the audition, Berry Gordy could probably dump them without any repercussions. The truth, though, Berry Gordy saw enormous potential for the future of Motown with the Jackson 5. For Berry Gordy, the plan was control. Berry Gordy sent the Jackson 5 to Hitsville to begin work on tracking songs for their debut album. Berry Gordy told him he wanted hits
Bobby Teller brought him down here. And he said, hey guys, I want you to meet the Jackson 5. Oh, we said, what? And we looked at these little kids and we just fell out laughing, you know, Jameson and myself.